Early Thursday morning in Ferguson, Missouri, police carried out a military operation against peaceful protesters who were protesting the death of a young black man, Michael Brown. Police rolled in and used military-style tactics against a crowd of people who were peacefully protesting, not causing any violence. In addition to this, police have stepped up actions including assaulting and arresting members of the media. At least 2 journalists have been arrested. While all of this is going on, the police continue to carry out military operations against the public, systematically violating their rights. At 6:20 a.m. local time, Ferguson police began a quasi-military campaign against the outraged public. Everyone was violently attacked, even though protesters remained peaceful. Not even media was spared from police violence, as news crews were assaulted by police as well. Officers violently suppressed news crews and dismantled their equipment and setups that are guaranteed under the First Amendment of freedom of speech. Meanwhile, mainstream media outlets, very large ones, are refusing to play any live footage of the police brutality that's going on in the city of 21,000 people right now. Only those journalists who have taken the time to go to the area to investigate the truth and show the world what's going on are the ones who have suffered the penalties, the police brutality that's going on right now. And this is a very clear violation of the First Amendment, one that the government, who's actually carrying this out, doesn't feel is wrong for doing. The rest of the mainstream media is doing its job in suppressing the images that are coming from the area, trying to keep the truth from the eyes of the public. The 2 arrested journalists are Ryan J. Riley of the Huffington Post and Wesley Lowery of the Washington Post. Both posted about their arrests on Twitter. Both men were later released without charge. Meanwhile, hacktivist group Anonymous claims that they had hacked their way into the Ferguson Police Department to obtain the name of the arresting officer. Now, police did confirm that they did suffer from some kind of attack, so that they claim to have kept them off. Now, Anonymous did go ahead and release the name of the officer. The officer has been identified as Brian Willman. The group posted a screenshot of his Facebook account under the false name Scooby Willman. On this page, he makes very suspicious posts saying, "Yep, nobody will find me with that name," but the job title says it all. "Guessing everyone is forgetting about that," responded a follower. "You have a good point. All changed," replied Willman. St. Louis County Police say that Willman is not a member of their police association. Anonymous sent a message saying that we'll see. As it turns out, he is not a member of the Wilson Police. And in fact, the journalist Ryan J. Riley of the Huffington Post, the one who was arrested by police, got a hold of the original report and has given out the identity of the officer who actually killed Michael Brown. The officer's name is Darren Wilson. Once this was released to the public, the police decided to speak publicly about the officer involved. Previously, they had refused to identify him for fear of his safety. Wilson, a 6-year veteran on the Ferguson police force, had a good record, Jackson said at a news conference. Local authorities said that they will work to ensure that Wilson is kept safe while the public and the media continues to be brutalized. However, Anonymous did manage to get a hold of some very interesting photographs of the chief of police and his home. Anonymous posted a photograph from the living room of the police chief of Ferguson, Missouri, where his son was horsing around. A Confederate flag is prominently displayed on the wall of the living room. The murder of young Michael Brown goes a lot deeper than what we are being told by the media. The white supremacist training of police officers in Ferguson, Missouri is directly connected to the murder of an unarmed young black man. Meanwhile, the public continues to be outraged about the murder, holding at least 90 vigils across the country, one of the biggest being in New York City. Thousands of people are rallying in New York in solidarity with the residents of Ferguson, showing support to people across the U.S. who have been victims of police brutality. The NYPD has threatened mass arrests if people do not stop blocking traffic. The NYPD has reportedly arrested at least 4 people during a peaceful rally intended to pay tribute to Michael Brown and others who have suffered from such tremendous police brutality. With all the tremendous criticism that's being placed upon Missouri police, they have come up with a very interesting tactic to deal with the public. They have decided to hire an African-American man as the head. In a blatant propaganda, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon on Thursday named a black Missouri Highway Patrol captain to oversee security in Ferguson. Nixon named Captain Ronald Johnson to direct security in the racially charged community. The tactic here is very clear. It's a very condescending and insulting one. He typifies he's a black guy, but he doesn't act like a black guy. You know the one I'm talking about, where it's, he's black, but he acts like a white person. This is one of the black people you can trust. I mean, this is clearly pandering to the public. Oh, look, we have put a black man in charge. Therefore, you cannot claim anything we do is racist. And that's very much the point, and very much what it is that they're trying to convey here. Don't worry, it's not racist because he's black. And he assures the white public, don't worry. He assures the white public, don't worry, he's one of us. He's a black guy, but he acts like a white guy, so you know you can trust him. This is an insult to the black community and blatant pandering to white supremacist attitudes. Supposedly here he is walking with the protesters, showing support with them. In addition, there have been several others, not many, who decided to break ranks and stand with the protesters as well. However, these police are urging crowds to be calm. They are merely there to prevent any action from being taken, to prevent people from resisting further police brutality. In another very interesting turn of events, the nation of Israel is now a part of this situation. In a very disturbing development, the chief of the St. Louis Police, Timothy Fitch, is set to spend a week in Israel learning counterterrorism tactics from the Israeli Defense Force. This information has been made by a press release. This week-long program is a part of the Anti-Defamation League's National Counterterrorism Seminar that includes visiting cities like Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Tiberias. The same tactics that are used to brutalize, murder, and outright commit genocide against the Palestinian people may very well soon be coming to the U.S. And I expect much outrage by the American public for this. However, they don't seem to be too particularly angry when it's used against third world people in Palestine. It's also very interesting to note that a lot of people are starting to draw parallels between what is happening in Gaza right now and the people in Missouri. I frankly feel that there is really no comparison whatsoever. People have been seen with signs saying the people of Gaza and the people of Missouri one struggle. This is absolutely a false equivalence. One person dies in America, and that is supposed to be comparable to the 50-60 year genocide that has been carried out against the people in Gaza. There would be a very big difference. The same people that are the United States is a huge supporter of what is going on in Gaza, which the American people refuse to stand up and do anything significant about. This is not the same struggle, and it shows the tremendous difference between the first world and the third world. The arrogance of first world chauvinism to compare their one death to what is essentially a 50-year genocide against Gazans. Of course, this is a crime that was carried out by Michael Brown, carried out against Michael Brown. It is wrong. It is a human rights violation. And the people who are responsible for it should go to prison. However, this is absolutely incomparable to the astronomical human rights violation that has been carried out in Palestine for all this time. This is not the same struggle. The United States is a colonializer nation. The people of Gaza are an oppressed nation. Qualitatively, these are not the same thing. I have much sympathy for Michael Brown, and this is not to take away from the suffering that him and his family are facing right now. But we should acknowledge that these two things are not comparable in any way, shape, or form. As if this police repression wasn't bad enough, the FBI has announced they will be taking over Ferguson's civilian control duties from the St. Louis County law enforcement. Democratic Governor Jay Nixon has given the order to call in heavier forces to deal with the backlash over the police killing of this unarmed young black man. Earlier that same afternoon, U.S. President Barack Obama and U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder told the public that they will become involved in investigating the young man's death. They did tell the media that they were going to go to the location, they will have investigators look into it, and that if it is found that the police officer did anything unconstitutional, that it broke the law, that it was an unnecessary killing, that officer and the police department would receive some kind of penalties for that action. Now, we're all familiar with such investigations, usually ones that end up with the person who committed the crime, the authority figure, completely walking and not suffering any kind of penalty whatsoever. At best, we can hope for this police officer to go to jail, and he'll be in protective custody, given a better, cushier situation because he's a police officer. The actions, even at the best, of this officer going to jail does nothing to stop the very nature of the racist police force in the community. This will not stop the police aggression and repression of African Americans in the United States. These abuses will continue. This racism is part of the very structure of the system itself, and throwing one man in jail who commits the kind of crime that goes on all the time, systemically, will not alter that. Merely arresting this officer and sending him to jail will not do anything, even if he is convicted. The very system itself is racist, and that must change. Going through this so-called legitimate democratic process will do nothing to alleviate the suffering of the citizens in that area. The general reaction to the young man that was killed, the reaction to the protests that have taken place as a result, show the tremendous racial divide that still exists in the United States. Many of the media are going out and decrying them as defending crime, and that these are black people out of control, and that they need to be called, they need to be stopped, and that they're animals, and all kinds of other racist attacks being thrown against these people. And all of it coming from, primarily white-owned media. As Huey P. Newton said, you can't expect a white-owned media to be honest about black people. And this shows that despite the good intentions of many white liberals, they cannot do anything to help because they are liberals. And I think this fact alone, the fact that the system is dominated, despite the fact it's a black president, it's still obviously a white-dominated system, that this shows more than ever the need for self-determination for the black nation. Many so-called progressive groups deny the existence of the black nation, some of them hojists. Despite that, it is very clear that black liberation will only happen when they actively take up the task themselves, organize their own communities, organize their own self-defense, essentially exercise their own self-determination. I do not consider what is going on to be riots. The media is portraying these as riots. I believe these are the actions of a demand by a community for accountability for the murder of a young man that took place. There were other murders. There were other crimes and repressions being carried out by black people in the area. And the cries against these injustices go ignored. They're not paid attention to. These are not riots. They are acts of anger, demands for accountability from the system that carries it out against them. This is a cry of anger against the neo-Confederate style system that still exists in Missouri, that still exists in this particular area. And these people need to be heard, they need to be acknowledged, and the oppression that they suffer needs to come to an end, even if it does mean burning the entire city to the ground. One of the thoughts that crossed my mind when this incident began is, where are all the patriots that were at the Clive and Bundy ranch? When a millionaire complained that he couldn't get what he wanted, and he essentially said, no, this is my land, I'll use it however I want, even though it's owned by the federal government. He's trespassing government property, and yet all these white patriots with guns show up to protect him. Poor millionaire has to pay a fine, and they all run there swiftly to defend him. But here it is, a person who was unarmed was killed by a police officer. Where are these people to come to the defense of the American people? They're nowhere to be found. Because in essence, what they really are is a bunch of white complainers out there to defend the privilege that they have as white first worlders. When this crime is carried out, even against a first world black man, it's completely ignored. These people are a racist organization, and they expose themselves as a racist organization by their refusal to help any kind of minority. If they really truly do believe in standing up for the American citizen, for the people who work, as they like to use working class, although they misuse it, they would be here, they would be there right now defending the people of the streets. But they go down to the Clive and Bundy ranch and nothing happens to them. The police stand there, they arrest a few people, but nothing really happens. But look at this massive militarized campaign actually carried out against African American folks. There's a huge difference. So all the white people with guns who were threatening to overthrow the government, this is sedition by the way, they get off scot-free and nothing serious really happens to them. But this happens in a black community where they're not threatening to overthrow the system, just merely acts of anger at an injustice that has been carried out against them. And the police brutally repress them. The media ridiculously attacks them, calls them all kinds of nasty names with a great deal of racist connotation. But not when it's white people. When it's white people, it's clearly very different. Have we learned something about guns here today? The Clive and Bundy Ranch has all these guns. Some of them aiming assault rifles at federal agents, and nothing is done. These are largely completely unarmed African Americans. Particularly in this latest raid, nobody was armed. It was a peaceful protest, and they suffer militaristic actions. Were the police afraid to move on the Clive and Bundy Ranch because they were armed? And that they're not afraid to move on this black community because they're not armed? I think the Black Panthers said it very well when they said they had to arm themselves, frankly, against the white establishment, from white people in general. They had their own self-defense squads to protect themselves from police brutality. You know, young black men going out with shotguns to defend themselves from police abuse. It's very clear that at least in Missouri, we do need a program like this again. And the racial connotation that pervades in gun ownership in the United States is very clear here. No outrage of the white people who hold guns against the federal agents, but the unarmed black people who peacefully protest are attacked by the media. And I think this at least should teach a very important lesson to the African American community in the United States, that they should arm themselves. They should arm themselves the same way white patriots do, because clearly, at least in this situation, it would better to be armed, because the police are already going to shoot you. They're already going to attack you. You might as well at least exercise your right to defend yourself. But what about this area in Missouri, this Ferguson? What kind of history of racial segregation does it have? It actually has quite a deal of racism. At one time, it was illegal to sell a house outside of a particular area to a black family. In other times, black families were forced to live in this one particular area. You were not allowed to do business in other areas. So there is a very, very long racist history of segregation, forcing the black community into this one particular area, and that is where they live. Of the 50 some odd areas, this is like the ninth. It's one of the most impoverished. It's also one of the most racially segregated groups. Missouri had a very large history of industrial production. In fact, the Impala was once manufactured right in that area. And since there has been a tremendous deindustrialization of the first world, should we really be surprised that some of the poorest people in the country, lower on the totem, minorities, have suffered the worst? There's been a huge destruction of jobs in that area. Poverty has massively increased. 1 in 4 people are considered below the poverty line. This is a very real reality of what's going on in that area. Of course, crime goes up. The police exaggerate. They make it seem worse than it is to justify their brutal racist repression. But in an economically depressed area like this, a lot of people lose hope. And a lot of people get angry at the system that screwed them over. And they have every right to be angry at the destruction of their lives, even though they did to some degree benefit from imperialism. They do have every right to rebel. It's not just the racist police that destroy them, but the racist economic system that attacks them as well. And sure, capitalism does cause poverty all over. We will see black people, African Americans, suffering disproportionately from the deindustrialization of the country, and will have higher rates of poverty than whites will, showing that capitalism is at least one system that cannot end the poverty and suffering and racism that African Americans face. The continued ownership of private property cannot deal with this racial inequality. It is only through the abolishment of private property where serious action can be taken to alleviate poverty, to alleviate racism. As long as private property exists, racism will continue to exist because it will give the power to racists to be able to be racist. Take this power from their hands. Eliminate the racism, that is capitalism. Collectivize, promote actual equality. I don't understand how people who support the system of inequality, that is capitalism, something predicated on fighting the idea of being equal, will somehow create racial equality and will somehow deal with racism. It absolutely won't, because it is very clearly, obviously, and touted as a system of inequality. And the government of capitalism is no different. While people have continued to suffer, the government cannot find any kind of economic aid to help the citizens. There's no money to be spent to help them. However, millions of dollars magically appears for military vehicles, for body armor, guns, all kinds of military equipment to suppress the government. That money magically appears. Should we really be surprised? Capitalism is the state. Inside of capitalism is a structure intended, designed to preserve capitalism itself. It cannot help people, even with a black president. Capitalism cannot end racism. Nothing short of a total and radical reorganization of society can take care of this. Radical, by going to the roots, dig up the entire system, its foundation, everything, and completely replace it. This is the only way to cure racism in the United States, to completely uproot the racist, terrible system that exists and replace it with an entirely new one, dedicated to equality. The answer is, of course, socialism. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. While you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.